Izzy at Minerva. Today we're going to look at how to use our basic jersey block to recreate a beautiful, elegant Bardot top. You can see the top in the image next to me right here. And what we're going to do is we're going to start off with our basic jersey block, which we drafted a couple of videos ago. So go back and refer to that and get your block ready, and then we're going to recreate this gorgeous look right here. In today's video, I am wearing a self-drafted little top. I was looking at pin tucks and that little technique. You can see that technique in a previous video that I filmed in the pattern drafting series. And I'm using our Minerva exclusive Rose Relations Viscose Chalet. So if you're interested in that fabric, we will tag it in the link below. Now, as always with this series, you're going to need your standard pattern drafting tools, and they're listed next to me right here. So go and grab those, and then let's start off together. I'm going to show you step by step how to adapt your block to create this look, and then I'm actually going to sew it up using some beautiful stretchy jersey that we have here at Minerva. We'll tag that fabric for you as well so that you can follow along at home. Right then, should we get straight on into it? Okay, so on this block we have just one piece of paper and one pattern piece for our front and our back, because this is our basic jersey block, and it's the same for the front and the back because it's all stretchy, isn't it? But the back neckline is higher and the front neckline is lower. I've also got my basic jersey block sleeve as well. This is the inset sleeve version of our basic jersey block. Okay, so this top is a nice fitted top. It's going to follow the curves of our body in exactly the same way as our original block did, which is this one right here. So we want to keep the shaping that we've got already on there, and all we want to do is just cut off effectively the top and the shoulders. So let's look at how to do that together. The first thing we're going to decide is how low we want our top to be. I'm going to draw a line that is parallel to our armscye line at 4 centimeters offset. Next, grab a tape measure and just measure the distance around that curve. For me, it's 6 centimeters. And mark a point along the sleeve curve that is that same length along the curve of the armscye. Then draw a line that is parallel to the armscye line along your sleeve line up here at that distance. Cut along those two lines. Okay, we can now remove those two pieces. We don't need them anymore. Now, when I look at this top behind me, I think that the hemline is quite low for a jersey top. That's because it's hitting where our hip is at that location. However, most jersey tops are going to start a little bit, or finish a little bit higher up. So what I'm going to do on this block here is actually raise up my bottom of my top line. And I'm going to do that by 8 centimeters. So just draw a line that's parallel with your hip line, 8 centimeters, or whatever you would like for your top. Okay, and really that's all we need to do for our sleeve and for our top. So we're halfway there now. What we need to do, however, is to draft that big band that's going to come across the top to make it into that lovely off-the-shoulder Bardot top. Let's do that now. Okay, to start off with, measure the length along the top from your centre back, centre front to your armscye, and just make a little note of that. And then do the same for your sleeve block. Okay, next tap in the length of your front with the length of your back, add those two together, and that is effectively going to be the length of the piece that we want to kind of sit on the top up here. But what I want is to make sure that it's going to kind of really stay there and stay up in place. So I'm just going to times that by 0.9 just to try and hold it in a little bit more. I don't want it dropping down. So multiply your length by 0.9, and whatever that is, draw a line that is that length on a new sheet of paper. Next, you want to decide how deep you want your like shoulder cuff effectively to be. So looking at our block here, you want to decide how deep you want it to be. So really that's, you know, up to you. It depends on the aesthetics that you want. If you want it to be like super like ruched up, or whether you want it to be really flat. I think I'm going to draft mine at about 12 centimeters deep, with the intention then of being able to sort of scrunch it up a little bit. So for me, I'm going to now draw my rectangle so that it is 12 centimeters high. And then I'm actually going to extend it so that it is the same width again on this side in order to ensure that it will fold back really nicely and neatly once I've drafted it and once I've put it on. So I want to have the right side of the fabric all the way around this pattern piece. Okay, so our little shoulder strip is looking really good. Brilliant. So we've done all of our drafting that we need to do. We're just going to turn the cuff in at the bottom. There's no extra detail that we're going to add there for this one. So let's go and grab our tracing paper and make our pattern pieces. Now, as we create our pattern pieces, I'm going to be drafting a 1.5 centimetre seam allowance all the way around my block. That's just simply because that's the way I like to draft it. Some people I know prefer just to do a 5 or 6 mil seam allowance with jersey so that you can just go straight to your overlocker and just sew it and without having to trim down loads of excess jersey. So if that is the case and that's what you prefer to do, make sure that at this point you just do a seam allowance of 5 millimeters rather than 1.5. Okay, so for our sleeve pattern piece, we've got a seam allowance all the way around except for on the centre fold line where we've annotated it to say place on fold. Grain line follows the line of the sleeve, the centre line, centre fold, and runs perpendicular to the hem of the sleeve. At the hem, I've just added my standard seam allowance. I intend to overlock that and just turn it under once, top stitch it. This is the Bardot top sleeve and we're going to cut 2 on the fold to make sure that we've got 2 sleeves. So on the top pattern piece, this is the front and the back, we're going to cut 2 on the fold. They're exactly the same because we've taken off the neckline, so it's really simple. We've added a seam allowance around everywhere else and a 1.5 centimetre hemline at the bottom. It really is as simple as that. You'll notice that here along the side seam, instead of having an angular shape, I've just softened that off just to create a bit more of a slightly elegant solution there. Okay, so in the final one, we're going to place this side on the fold. Obviously, we've only calculated it for half of the pattern piece, so that needs to flip over, and then we need to cut 2 on the fold, one for the front, one for the back. Grain line's just going to follow the line at the same as the top. It's going to be attached onto the top here, so that's pretty straightforward. Now, it might be helpful just to pop a few little notches. So on this one here, I put a little fold line notch there, and also what I'm going to do, just at 5 mil offset from the folded edge, I'm just going to put 1 notch here, just at 5 mil offset, and another one here to annotate where the centre of the shoulder strip is. And then I'm also just going to put 1 here on our front and back pattern piece. Now, the reason why I've done that is because this is drafted at 90% the width of this. So that's going to help us just make sure that we're getting that right and nice and neat on the centre. Now, the same principle also effectively is going to apply to the jersey sleeve block, but really what I want is the notch to be right on the fold line here. Just make that a little bit easier. So we'll have a double notch at the front and the back at the centre, and then here on the sleeves I just want to annotate, and I might just do that with like a little triangle just to make that a little bit more obvious, and that will then line up with the seam line here. Brilliant. Okay, so we've drafted out the shape for our new top. We've then created our pattern pieces, and now it's time to cut them out and sew them up so that we can see what the effect of this is like. I love this point in the process because it's always really fun to see what your pattern drafting, like what the results of your pattern drafting process is, and there's always going to be changes that you're probably going to want to make, and that's just part of the design process. It's the first iteration of something, then often evolves into numerous different sort of design avenues that you can wander down. So let's take a look and see what this first one looks like, and then from there, I don't know, you might want to make the shoulder a bit wider or narrower, you might not want to double it over, just see what it looks like. So let's get sewing. Okay, so the fabric that I've chosen is the Minerva Core Range Cotton Jersey Stretch Knit fabric. We've got a lot of lovely colours and options of this fabric, and it's really soft, it's really lovely. We are going to sew the body first, and the front and the back are exactly the same. So with right sides together, pop the front over the back and pin and sew the side seams. Now I've done a 1.5 centimetre seam allowance, so that's the seam allowance I'm going to use, and that's the seam allowance I'm going to sew, but you may well have done a different seam allowance, like 5 or 6 mil. So just make sure when you start stitching that you remember what seam allowance you used to draft this pattern. Now with jersey, it's always helpful to know that you need to do a stretch stitch, and the one that I'm going to do is just a lightning bolt stitch, which is like a small zigzag stitch. You can do a zigzag stitch, like a narrow little one. You can also buy stretch thread, like the Gutermann Maraflex thread, or you can overlock or interlock or cover stitch the seams as well. What you basically want is a stretchy stitch, not a straight stitch. Once you've sewn those 2 side seams, you can finish them by overlocking them or just doing a little zigzag stitch and then press towards the back. Next, we're going to take our sleeve. Now we've got 2 sleeve pattern pieces. We're just going to fold each of them individually with right sides together and then we're going to pin them in place and sew them using our standard seam allowance. Okay, wonderful. So now we've got our front and back, it's interchangeable, and 2 sleeves as well. We've sewn and overlocked all those seams. So let's turn this right side out now, and then we can attach our sleeve to our main top. Now the lovely thing about this pattern, now that we've turned it right side out, is that you can see that they're all, the front and the back is exactly the same. So it's really easy to worry about which side goes where. But what we're going to do now is attach our sleeve to our bodice, and we're going to start off just by lining up that side seam of both the body and the sleeve, and then just pin around the rest of the curve. It won't go all the way around, it will just go up to that curve, won't it? And then obviously once you've pinned it, you can then sew it and finish it however you'd like, as in overlock it or zigzag stitch it. Jersey doesn't really fray, so you can of course just leave the raw ends if you prefer. Perfect. Okay, so look at that, we're beginning to get what's looking like a very cute little top here. Right, what we need to do then is move on to create this band up here. Okay, we've got 2 shoulder strips here, and we're going to sew them together along the raw edge. So open them up and let's pop them together, right sides together, and just pin and sew along the short sides. Okay, so those side seams are now sewn together, and I have actually pressed it open. What I want us to do now is just to fold it in half. Do you remember where those little notches were up here? We're just going to fold it in half so that it's wrong sides together, and so the raw ends are going to match up. Okay, we've also got as a reference 2 little notches in the centre of the strip, the shoulder strip, so you can line that up too, and the rest should just pin in place nicely. Great, okay, so that's all pinned in place now. Okay, the next step is to turn your top inside out to this one, and we're going to attach this cuff to the top. Once you've pinned all of that in place, we're then just going to sew it using our seam allowance, our standard seam allowance, whichever one it is for you. And then I would then recommend finishing this seam, simply because it is one that could potentially roll out and be seen, although it shouldn't do if we're wearing it properly. Okay, so this is what it should look like once you have sewn it together. So we've got the finished side on the right side of the garment, and that's simply because when we turn it down like that to create that lovely little band across the top, we don't want the seam to be showing there at that point. That is just looking absolutely gorgeous. Right, the only thing left we've got to do now is just to hem our cuffs and the bottom of the top. So you can do that whichever way you want. I'm just going to overlock the edges and then turn it up by my seam allowance, which is 1.5 centimetres, and then just stitch that in place. Okay, so here's our little Bardot top, as you can see, beautifully styled here in our Minerva fabric. I absolutely love the colours on this. I think this looks really cute. So if you've been following along at home and you've made your own version of the little Bardot top, please do tag us. We'd absolutely love to see what you guys are making at home. And so that wraps up our little mini series all about how to create different types of jersey tops. We've shown you and demonstrated a range of really fun little techniques there. I hope you've really enjoyed them. Next week we are going to continue our series, but we're going to start a brand new series looking at how to create a jersey stretchy trouser block. Now I think this is one that you are all going to absolutely love. It's really fun and I look forward to seeing you next week. So thanks for joining me today. It's been great to film that with you. I hope you've really enjoyed it and I will see you next week.